Welcome to the Common Bridge, where policy and current events are discussed in a fiercely nonpartisan manner. The host, Richard Helppie, is a philanthropist, entrepreneur, and columnist who has over 1 million listeners around the world. His podcast and YouTube show draws guests and audiences across the political spectrum.
Hello, welcome to the Common Bridge. We've got a great topic and a great guest today. We have with us Dr. Erik Bean. He has written a number of books, and his most recent book is Bias is All Around You. Highly recommend this book. It is a great read with a lot of take-home value. How are the modern communication methods affecting you? How are they meant to affect you? And what you can do to be a discerning consumer of news and information and opinion. Dr. Bean, welcome to the Common Bridge. So glad you're with us.
Very good to be here, Rich. Appreciate it.
Great. Just so our audience likes to know a little bit about our guests, and if you don't mind, where did you grow up? What's been your progression? And what are you up to today? Let's bring people up to speed on why you're the guy to write this very well done book.
Well, thanks, Rich. I graduated from Michigan State University in 1995 with a master's in journalism. And then primarily over the last, 20 to 25 years, I've spent a career in higher education, in research, as well as secondary education. Taught a lot of classes in English and composition, philosophy, critical thinking, journalism. And, over the years, I've learned quite a bit about attribution and how to decipher quality sources from poor quality sources. And lately, with what's been going on across the country, the pandemic, the last presidential election, it occurred to me that we all need some help. We need some help because we're being bombarded with misinformation on a daily basis. And I noticed this as early as last year when I had some friends in my social media network who were sharing posts without properly vetting the information. And so that's when the idea for the book first occurred.
Indeed, I think this is very timely. And today we're recording as Facebook is being investigated further and more internal documents coming out about the way they've manipulated information and steered traffic to various sites and away from various sites. We know that occurs on most of the platforms, including, of course, the Facebook-owned Instagram, Twitter, and elsewhere. So I think this is a great book to make a more aware consumer. I should also point out that in a few short days after this recording, Michigan Wolverines, undefeated Spartans of Michigan State, are going to meet in the backyard brawl in East Lansing. Care to make a prediction? This podcast and YouTube will publish after the game's played. What do you think?
I think I understand that there's been 2 times in the last dozen years where they've both come into this undefeated, and I think Michigan State has prevailed. Being a Spartan, I'm gonna go green all the way.
Yeah, I would expect that, and I hope for a good game in the backyard brawl. It's a shame one of the team has to lose, but my prediction is that if Michigan State wins, next year both teams will have a new coach, as State's coach will be off to LSU or someplace, and Jim Harbaugh will be doing something, but he won't be coaching the Wolverines if he can't beat the Spartans this year. Anyway,
that's it. I think it's a win for the economy for both cities and for Michigan. So that's good for everybody.
Indeed, it is. So early on in your book, you talk about transparency as a social value. And that is something I thought was fascinating, given that we were all raised in an era of commercialization. We're all told, hey, don't believe that. That's just a commercial trying to sell you something. You talk about the 7 risks of bias, the 7 sources of bias, and then you have a great structure about how to process that. So maybe start us there. Transparency as a social value. What's that about?
Well, you know what? I was joined with Tim Voss, the current director of Michigan State University School of Journalism program, wrote the foreword, and he discussed that pretty openly. Everybody talks about transparency, but the truth is that we really don't deliver the best job when it comes to transparency. And I like the anecdote that he used. He basically said that, if I hand you 1,000-page document on what took place in Congress today, he's saying that I've been transparent to you. But who has the time to go through 1,000 pages and vet that material so that the information in it, is non-bias? And so that's what it comes down to, transparency. When it comes to the 7 sources of bias, this is the thing that really struck me as I was teaching for many years and working with my students. It occurred to me that really there are only 7 sources of all information. So no matter what information comes your way, if it's flat in a newspaper, if it's in a magazine, if the information is in a video, a podcast, a TV show, information can be boiled down to 7 sources. And those 7 sources, and there's not any particular order, are academic, hidden agenda, for profit, nonprofit, government, watchdog groups, and individuals like you and me. Individuals like you and me. So immediately, when we get a piece of information, we have to look at the overall bias of the structure of the source that it's coming from, because then we can immediately discern how that information was designed in the first place, what its purpose was. And it doesn't mean that it's biased to the point where it's not usable. It just means that we need to stop, take a deep breath, use critical thinking, and begin to vet out how useful that piece of information is.
It's kind of a better structured way of saying consider the source. Where did this come from? And I love the example about reading thousands of pages of congressional testimony,
Yeah.
and then who filtered it and why did they filter it, and so forth. What are you talk about the 7 risks of bias as well? Are those part and parcel of the same sources of risk?
Well, no. So the 7 risks, really, if it comes down to it, is that if we are, the term haste makes waste, right? If
Mhm.
we immediately share something without properly vetting it, okay, it could lead us to following a false cause. It could lead us to feeling simply foolish. It can tarnish our credibility. It can attract the wrong people. It can create undue stress, right? And it can also compromise your values, right? And finally, it can harm our mental health. It can harm our mental health. And it seems like something so innocent. Rich, in 2018, I was fortunate enough to have a paper accepted to a conference at Oxford University. And it was a conference on the internet, policy, and the public and democracy. And the people who study the internet at Oxford University, they've done research and they've discovered that people will innocently share a post, for example, to help get their candidate elected, even if they haven't properly vetted it, and they think
Mhm.
nothing of it. They'll just go back, have a cup of coffee, take a bite out of their sandwich, and do it. And not everybody, but they've discovered that some people do this. And so, in my book, on the very last page, I liken that to imagine walking into a theater and screaming fire when there's no fire. What would happen to you if you did that? So, right now, we as individuals, we all have to take better accountability. And we all have to properly vet information before we share it, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And that's what prompted me to write this book.
So some of the things that you talk about is, taking time to assess, and asking who created the information, and something called a preparatory journal. I think if I understood it, it's these hot takes that we hear, where a story starts and it goes ripping around the internet. It's around the world, and several days or a week later we find out it's just not true. But it's gone from
Yeah.
consciousness at that point, but in the meantime gotten a lot of people alarmed. Is that kind of what you were getting at there? And what are some of
Well,
the personal techniques people might do to combat that?
yeah, so Rich, this goes back to, that childhood game that we all played when we were kids. I don't care what generation you're from. War baby, baby boomer, Gen X, Gen Y. Everybody remembers that game where we sat around as kids and we whispered a message into somebody's ear, and by the time that message came full circle, it was probably not the original message that it was intended for, right? Yeah. So what it is I created a bias assessment form. It's a one-page form, and this bias assessment form, and it took a lot of consideration, and it took a lot of critical thinking for me to come up with the right form. But the process begins with identifying one of those seven sources. But the next step in the process is something that I call CLEMP, that you might remember. CLEMP,
Yeah.
KLEMP. And what I did is I simply took the ancient Greek rhetorical styles, and I put them in an easy to remember acronym, CLEMP. So K is for Kairos, L is for Logos, E is for Ethos, M is for Mythos, and P is for Pathos. And what that means, just to run down it real quick, is Kairos, and the Greeks knew this, hundreds of years ago. Kairos is how timely is a piece? How new is that piece since it's been published? Has it been published in the last day, the last week, the last month? The older it gets doesn't mean that it's bad information, but it means that it's not as fresh.
It
We've
could
all
it
heard
could it could indeed be more accurate.
it could
Uh,
be. That's
Yeah, it could be more accurate if it's correcting something that went out into the echo chamber, which
Yep.
we've seen over and over again. There's dozens of examples, but most recently, the whole ivermectin thing was around the world with the Associated Press, Rolling Stone, NPR, etc. And it turned out the whole thing was just. It's my show. I can say this. Then it was all bullshit. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that I mean, there's probably you can probably think of hundreds of examples, but that's one of them.
Absolutely. And so on our form, when we penalize how old an article is, it only receives just a minor, maybe 1 point off rather than 5 points off, weighted for the other uh, things that we do when we assess for bias. So you're correct. Old information can be good information, especially if there's been nothing new to, unvalidated, right? So, but Kuros is something that we all need to be aware of. L is for logos, which really is reason and logic that's built into the piece. But I like to simply say facts or statistics. If you're reading a piece that contains no attribution, no citation, no facts or statistics, it's an editorial. Now, it doesn't mean that editorials aren't good to read. We all should read editorials to get different, opinions from different people, but we have to take it with a grain of salt because they're not giving us any facts or any attribution or citations, or maybe very little. The
And
E, yeah, go ahead.
I thought this was a powerful part of your book, by the way, and I think that we should dive into this because I remember in reading your book about the logos part, I recalled I did a episode 3 or 4 episodes back about critical race theory with Professor Ruparalia, and there was a widely repeated story around the internet. I could never get back to original source. That someone should have been able to say it was this place at this time that in this school district that such an event had occurred. And also in my reading, as in everybody's reading, statistics, sometimes you'll see a percentage increase, sometimes you'll see or decrease, and sometimes you'll see actual numbers. And my radar for bias goes up. If you're giving me numbers, you've got to give me context. So, a 300% increase, did we go from 1 to 3 or from 1 million to 3 million of whatever it is we happen to be counting? So is this kind of the logos view, is to talk about facts and statistics? And facts, as a journalist, are we still dealing with the, who, what, when, where, and why, or has it evolved since that time?
Well, that's it. I mean, right, facts can be manipulated, statistics can be manipulated. That's why we included a little note about, Mark Twain in our book too, because his famous saying is figures don't lie, but liars figure, right? So, it all does go back to, if you can find the information as it was originally published from the horse's mouth, that's better than necessarily finding it in other types of sources. But we need to have some trust in some of the sources that we, have found to be reliable over the years as well. So, but no, that's a very good point about logos. Because we can't believe all the statistics. That's what we say in the book. One week there's a research study that oatmeal is good for you, right? It's high in
Mm-hmm.
fiber. The next week they might say, well, but if you eat too much oatmeal, you might gain too much weight because of carbohydrates. So, we have to put all information into perspective, and we have to really sift through it with a fine tooth comb. And until such a time when there's a service that can actually rate the biases of every piece of information that we have, we need to take the time to go out there and do it right now. So that's for the logos component. That's right. Um, when we move further on into Klemp, right, we get into ethos and mythos. And, I want to be able to share at least about ethos first, because ethos is the qualifications of the writer, the background of the writer. And in most cases, ethos helps the writer make a better piece, especially in the creative fields we talk about in the book. If you look at Steven Spielberg, his background is Jewish. So, he wrote Schindler's List or produced the movie. So, he does a very good job of including his ethos because he's experienced some of the situations that went on in the book through his family. So there's nothing wrong with ethos. The background of the writer is very important, but we need to do some reconnaissance. We need to go out over the internet and put in the name of the author and see what comes back, right? That's all part of it. And then we move into mythos. This is more time consuming. Mythos is different from ethos. Mythos is the subject matter expertise of that writer. And, again, in most cases, it enhances a piece. But if somebody's publishing hate literature, if somebody aligns themselves with organizations that have hidden agendas, their mythos doesn't really contribute that much to humanity, as we say in the book. So, that's something that we need to have people research into when they like a writer. They need to take the time to research the background of the writer. Now, obviously, these two pieces of Klemp can be very time consuming. If you do just Kairos and Logos alone, the only other piece you need, without doing any more research, that you can see directly in the published piece is pathos. How much emotion does the piece contain? Now, we're
Mm-hmm.
not trying to turn everybody into robots. Pieces should have a little emotion tied to them. People should, they need to have emotion because pieces need to bond to the reader. But when they have so much emotion and with no logos, and they might be outdated, we could say that perhaps be careful because that piece could be highly biased right from
You
the
know,
get-go.
Eric, something that I'm curious about as it pertains to pathos. We have had some experts on the Common Bridge, Matt Taibbi, among others, that talk about the news reporting of the day. It's designed to stimulate emotion and to create outrage. And it's like they can't get attention unless they're overplaying that hand. Is that part of pathos that should we be asking ourselves, well, wait a minute, what kind of reaction are you trying to get out of me and why? I think if I understood back to the earlier parts of Clem.
Yeah, so that's right. So I when I think of pathos, I think of people like Howard Stern, right? The original shock jock, right?
Yes.
His whole concept was to elicit as many emotions as he could, and he did that by swearing, by using provocative language, colorful language, anything to keep the viewer engaged, right? And so it's and there are other people that do that too. So but even when we go to a Sunday morning sermon at church, or we go to a synagogue, there's a certain amount of pathos that's built
Of
into that
course. Yes.
sermon. But the pathos needs to be used in the right way, right? It needs to be used. I always like to go back for the purposes of humanity, right? When people start using pathos and they're spewing out hate speech, they're spewing out messages that haven't been well researched, then there needs to be a big red flag when it comes to pathos. And again, we're talking more for news pieces than we are talking for pure entertainment. But there's a fine line to how people get their news today and their social networks. We getting our news years ago, it took a lot more work. We had to get in our car. We had to go to a store. We had to find a newspaper, right? Or unless one was delivered to our front door, right? Today, most people don't do that. They simply, use what's most convenient to them. And what's most convenient to them is what comes across on this smartphone device.
Yeah,
And
and
so
I think they figured out a lot of what you figured out, but for not such a good purpose. That um, I could tweet this out and get people riled up. I've been tracking voter laws, and I've actually read the voter laws, and they're being grossly misrepresented. All right, and that's a topic probably for another day. We did have Professor Derek Muller on to talk about what election law is about. But one of the purveyors, an alarmist with a sordid past, let's say, actually said, "I'm out here doing this, highly justified work, and if you don't like what I'm doing, don't follow me." I mean, my answer should be, if you really believe it, you should want everybody to hear, and you should want to be challenged. But it's getting emotion on something that's very important and leading people down the wrong path. Um, but I don't want. I've got lots of other questions, but I don't want to.
sure,
I want to make
sure.
sure that we explain to people about the biases, and also I'd like to make mention that part of your book there are worksheets that you can obtain to help your own critical thinking skills, which I thought was brilliant the way that you codified that. I will also mention that the book is available on Audible. It's available on Amazon, and I'm sure many other places as well. Um, but talk a little bit about when you talk about things like hidden agendas, the for profits, the not for profits, the watchdogs, and the government. What these are the sources, and um, what is it that we need to be aware of? And part of that, and I don't know if this is a summary or not, but you said that Jesse Ventura, a former governor of the state of Minnesota, said there's 63 documents that the government doesn't want you to read. I'd like to know what those 63 are and how long are they? How long would it take to read?
Well, that's it. That's it. Well, so but here's what it comes down to in a nutshell. And I can start off with the academic source, right? The
Okay.
in the academy, the number one goal of the academy in higher education, is research. Uh, in addition to educating, the students that attend the schools, but they are there to contribute to the body of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And how that
Right.
occurs is through a peer-reviewed process, right? But you know, higher ed needs to be careful. There's different quality of peer-reviewed journals. There's, and even in that area too, some very well-known companies are having researchers pay to have their work reviewed now. It's not just free peer reviewed anymore. And because of just the sheer volume of information that's come out. So, but there's pressure. There's pressure on professors. The famous saying, publish or perish, right? And so it doesn't mean that the research that's out there, we shouldn't read. We should read, but we need to read it very carefully, or we need to make sure we go to other sources that filter it with a non-biased approach, and just understand that, like any source of information, academics are motivated, to get tenure.
Mhm.
And again, it's not a bad thing. But it's just something that we need to be aware of, because the research that's generated, those studies, they could cost thousands of dollars. They could cost millions of dollars. Sometimes that's the only information that we have to move forward. If you think about what's going on with the COVID vaccines right now, the studies that are going on. It's one thing for a vaccine manufacturer to do its own research, but it's less bias if an independent research
Mhm.
company did the research on the vaccine as well, right? So, so that's the academic category in a nutshell. The other, probably the source that spews out more information than any other source, is for profit, because we live in a for profit system, and for profits have the money. They can advertise to us. They can buy their way into newspapers with advertorials. That's when you buy an ad, and you also get a write up for your product. And that's been practiced in the industry for many years, right? An
Mhm.
advertorial, right? But so for profits, they're out to make money. And so we use Ford just as an example. I've owned Fords. I love Fords. But Ford's out to make a profit. So, companies aren't going to negatively say anything bad about their products, but there is something that's been around for years in the advertising industry called truth in advertising. There
Mhm.
needs to be some standards, right, to truth in advertising. So for profits pump out a lot of information.
Yeah,
Then
and
we have,
look, the iconic documentary "Super Size Me,"
yeah,
where he had so many good statistics in there comparing the advertising budget of one company, McDonald's Corporation, against the entire budget for the United States Department of Agriculture to put out messages about what healthy food was. That it's really on a monetary basis a situation of being outgunned by for profits. We can think back to other times when cigarettes were promoted as being healthful.
that's right.
We had the period with C. Ever Coop was the Surgeon General, who finally ripped the mask off the tobacco companies who knew they had to get kids addicted in their teens because adults rarely took up smoking. So that for-profit motivation is clearly out there. And I know people are watching with interest around the vaccines because we desperately need answers about that. And that's a sea of misinformation, disinformation, uh, alongside some really strong research that is being done privately. The Great Barrington Declaration being one of those private, of course, our own CDC uh, organization, as well as we've had Dr. James Baker from the University of Michigan on the program 3 times now, talking about his research, and he is a primary researcher for the vaccines. Uh, but it's very difficult to get good, clear information, particularly as the subject matter develops.
Well,
Um,
that's
but
yeah,
go
that's it. I
ahead,
mean,
Rich.
Rich, because there's so much information being pumped out on a daily basis. But when we talk about healthcare information, it's just a good point right now to mention that the United States Surgeon General, Murthy, he's got a call out there right now on the internet. You can download his PDF document that he's got a call right now that we all need to do what we can to combat health misinformation that's plaguing many communities right now. So, but I just wanted to mention that right now,
Yeah.
and
Brian, let's get a link to that and put it up on the website, richardhelppie.com. I think that's an important read.
yeah,
So we will get that um, on the air and help publicize that. Now, you also mentioned not-for-profits as
yeah.
being an issue. How can that be?
Well, so again, it's not that that we're saying that nonprofits aren't are biased or not biased. We're simply saying that this is another source that we need to be aware of. Nonprofits, churches, the United Way, things like that. All we're
Oh, I see.
saying is that check the validity of their information. Are they using proper citations and attribution when they're making a plea for assistance? Does the money go towards a proper cause? Things
Mhm.
like that. Hopefully it does. But all we're saying is that the old-fashioned saying, "Don't believe everything you read." They're just another source that we need to be aware of because over the years, like for-profits, like the academic community, um, their messages have been skewed, and their messages might not have been published with the best citations and the best information possible. And that's why we need to be aware of nonprofits. And then I also included watchdog groups, which are also
Mhm.
typically normally a nonprofit, but I wanted to separate them just because they have a unique role where their job is to watch everybody else, to watch the for profits, to make sure they're advertising correctly, to watch other nonprofits, to make sure that they're not harming animals, to do their thing. So, watchdog groups are another source. And over the years, there's been good ones and there's been some that haven't been so good. So again, just another source of the seven. And then we also get into hidden agenda group, and those are the ones like QAnon. They they're not about transparency. They're not about good customer service. They don't usually have a 1-800 line that you can go and get answers to, uh, right? But they're out there, and but if you can't discern the information that you're getting, if you can't see a source, a copyright date, um, if there are people that you can talk to readily, that's a red flag that they might be a hidden agenda group, especially if they're spewing hate messaging, things like that.
Right, you're trying
So
to get you try if they're trying to motivate you emotionally to try to get you to go one direction or another.
that's
Um,
right.
that that's the scary part. It's like, okay, who are you? Why do you want me to believe this? Why do you want me to react like this?
Yeah.
And why aren't you out in the light of day? So yeah,
Yeah.
we're those kind of groups have been around a long time.
Yeah.
They are now supercharged on the modern communication technology that we have today, and the easier to find affinity groups. So and
Yeah.
also because of the power of the tools, they're prone to exaggeration. Now I will confess I've not like gone on their website or looked into them. I've had advocates appeal to me, and I've asked them, just like remember the book Anonymous that came out in the prior administration. You had to look at that and go, okay, is it how real is this? Well, it turned out to be garbage, right? 28-year-old kid wrote it, but it was portrayed as a senior advisor, and so you have to look at that and kind of say, all right, if you really had this point of view, why wouldn't you be front and center saying it? Similarly, with some of these conspiracy groups, you should be front and center saying it. And there's plenty of news outlets if you want to be, you can come on this program, or you can go on uh, any of the many news outlets. Do your own YouTube channel this afternoon if you want to. So that's my cut on it. I don't know if that squares up with your research or not, and I'd love to be corrected and improve my ability to sort things out.
Yeah, no, no. I mean, that's it, Rich. I mean, these groups are taking advantage. They know the power of social media. The power of Twitter. When you can send out a communication, and by the way, research, on the use of Twitter. This was done over 10 years ago. I remember. First reading about I think it was Mubarak in was it Mubarak in Egypt, the takeover of him, because you can ask people to do things a lot faster in social media than you can if you're just sending an email out to somebody, because you're not guaranteed whether or not they're going to read it. But when you can post it, in something like Twitter, you can magnify your message greatly, and produce a lot more followers. And people are vulnerable these days. You might be led down a primrose path, because it seems like they're giving you good information. They're giving you what you want to hear, and that's why I also wanted to make sure that everybody knew that right at the beginning of the book, we're asking everybody that to understand that we all have our own personal biases, and we need to check our biases before we even start analyzing a piece of information. Does my personal biases get in the way of me understanding that that information is or is not authentic, is not transparent, is not objective, right?
Yeah, and wasn't that the seventh source of bias with individuals, both
it,
people sending and the message coming back?
that's right. Yeah, there's individuals which comprise, because years ago, when you and I wanted to make a ding in a national conversation, we had to sit down with a piece of paper and a pen. We had to sit down in front of a typewriter. We had to take that message, put it in an envelope, and send it to a TV station, send it to a newspaper, hope that they would publish our editorial to contribute to a national conversation, right? So obviously today, as individuals, any one of us can hit post in a social media. We can design our own websites. Our information is out there, and we can contribute to the body of knowledge. But are we really contributing effectively in a national conversation if we haven't vetted information or done our own research? And that's what it's all about. So yes, we're all individuals. We're all part of those seven sources. You could be an individual working for a for-profit. You can be an individual working for a nonprofit. You could be an individual working for a hidden agenda group. Hopefully you're not. But the bottom line is that all these demarcation lines need to be thought of, and those represent, conclusively the seven sources of overall information that comes our way every single day. And what we do with that information says a lot about our character, says a lot about our decision making capabilities. And that's why we devoted a whole chapter in the book. It's a very short chapter, because we wanted to get to the point: hasty generalizations,
Yeah.
and that's probably one of the biggest fallacies. The other thing we have to do with the information, the chapter 6 was to vet for fallacies as well.
Yes, I love the way that you put the book together. Again, the book is Biases All Around You by Dr. Erik Bean. Um, and you've a couple other things as we get near the end of our talk today. Um, the 10 fallacies, and you talked about cognitive dissonance. I, as I'm sure everybody does, see that every place is that you can have somebody, mouthing the talking points, and you say, well, look, does this fact, square with that? And the pushbacks that I've gotten, either emotional reaction or, well, where did that come from? And a great example would be somebody, very learned person and a very left-wing type person. And I said, well, did you see the testimony? And they go, where'd you get that? Fox News? I said, no, I watched C-SPAN, Senate Intelligence Committee hearing during the day. Okay. And you can read it in the transcript. This is what was said. The fact that was irrefutable firsthand information didn't comport with that false generalization. And I actually could almost visualize the cognitive dissonance kicking off, trying to find a way to reject that hard fact. That's kind of the takeaway I got from those chapters in the book. But I'm not sure I was reading it right. And I defer to your superior subject matter
Yeah.
knowledge on this.
Well, and great question. Well, first of all, let's discuss what cognitive dissonance is. All right.
Okay, yeah, great.
Festinger in 1957 was among the first, people to coin the term cognitive dissonance. And we talk about that. I believe it's on page 31 in the book. All right. And what this is, it's an uncomfortable psychological state that exists when there are inconsistencies between one's behaviors and one's cognitions. And furthermore, it kind of really tugs and pulls at the very values that we believe in. So, in other words, if you eat a bad meal and you did, because we all want to have a meal that tastes great, and it may not be that healthy for us all the time. So the cognitive dissonance is what you experience. It may raise your stress level. You may punish yourself because you knew you shouldn't have done that, and so you'll be good to yourself and you'll eat a healthy meal. But so cognitive dissonance is the feeling that we feel inside our head when we may do something wrong. So what I was trying to allude to is, if we share a piece of information that we haven't properly vetted, that could lead to cognitive dissonance. That it should lead to, if we have a conscience, it should lead to cognitive dissonance, because we know that we shouldn't have hit send in our social, we shouldn't have posted that because we didn't have enough information to validate that. So,
And,
so
and I
that, yeah.
and don't the algorithms of the online platforms kind of play into that? They have kind of codified what our belief systems might be, and they're sending us stuff to reinforce that point of view.
That's right. That's another aspect that the book discusses, is that, corporate America pays for these algorithms. He who has the most gold rules, right?
Yeah.
And so they pay for these, and corporations like Facebook, people, they're not telling us necessarily the algorithms. That's why Facebook found themselves in hot water recently, because one of the whistleblowers, and I can't conclude this, I'm just relaying the information that I heard from the whistleblower, is that the algorithm was created to accentuate more negative conversation in the network than it was to accentuate more positive, helpful
And
information.
adding to our growing mental health crisis, and
Exactly.
I know that you had some direct and very painful experience with that, and hence the your motives in writing this book and where you're going to raise money for that cause for the Ethan Bean mental health, mental awareness. Um,
That's right.
I thought you tied that in beautifully with your academic work, your really pure research, and very painful personal experience. So I just wanted to. It's not really a question, other than it's more of a compliment. But if you'd like to comment
Yeah, no,
as we
so
go to wrap up.
so as we were deciding if we wanted to publish the book, the book is published through my nonprofit entity, the Ethan Bean Mental Wellness Foundation, that I started in 2019 after losing my 17-year-old son to a mental illness. But the we wanted it to go to a nonprofit because we want to help people, right? And so it made sense to do it through our organization and to be transparent about it in the book as well. But information can hurt people whether they have a mental illness or whether they don't have a mental illness. You can be the most highly educated person in the world. Information can outsmart any one of us. And that's another reason why we decided to write the book. I say we because I want to thank my outstanding editor, Sherry Wexler, for doing a great job. The amazing paper cut illustrations that Gail Gorski took the time to include for this effort, just an unbelievably creative effort. And so when you look at the fallacies in the last chapter, and we all need to vet information for fallacies. I know we're running out of time. Um, and then just understanding that our mental health is very important. A book that I published because of the loss of my son was called Ethan's Healthy Mind Express in the fall of 2019. And that book even has a couple of pages to warn children not to believe everything you read on the internet and to be careful of what's called the dark web that could affect even younger
Mm.
children as well. So that's where there was a similar component to understanding that information has to be used wisely. And I do think information affects the mental health. People who have autism are even more affected by misinformation than people like you or I.
Well, there is so much more in the book that we can't cover today, but you have some very practical advice about how to vet sources of journalism, how to understand fallacies, great statistics. 6%, six corporations control 90% of the news, and also some worksheets. Um, Eric, where can people get the book today, either in audio form or print version or any other ways? Where can they
Yeah,
go to
so
get it?
yeah, the 72-minute audiobook is available even through the Apple store as well as audiobooks.com and through Amazon. It's a 72-minute journey. I think that right now that's being sold at a very reasonable price. We also have a Kindle version of the book you can download immediately through Amazon. We have a Nook version of the book if you're a Barnes and Noble person. We have a paperback of the book right now through Amazon. And we also have a beautiful hardcover book, more archival quality, being sold through Barnes and Noble right now. So, feel free to go check it out. And, it's available widely right now.
Great. Any closing thought for our audience today? This has been fascinating. I am so grateful that you've taken your time to explain to our audience what your book is about.
Well, I appreciate that. In the book, Rich, we talk about Pulitzer. Joseph Pulitzer was a New York congressman, and we've all heard of the Pulitzer Prize in journalism. But he said more than 100 years ago that our republic and its press will rise and fall together. And I truly believe that that call has never been more important than right now.
I concur. We've been talking today with Dr. Erik Bean, author of the book Bias is All Around You. It is a great read, highly recommended, and perhaps Dr. Bean will return to speak with us again about this book and others that I know he's thinking about. This is Rich Helppie, your host, signing off on The Common Bridge.
Thanks for joining us on The Common Bridge. Remember to rate us, review us, and comment about what you heard today, and recommend us to your friends. Visit us at richardhelppie.com and sign up for special promotions. This broadcast was produced by Stunt 3 Multimedia and is available on YouTube and all podcast directories. All rights are reserved by Richard Helppie.